So if you are a psychiatric nurse practitioner in California, you know that January 1st, 2026 was supposed to be a massive day.
Oh, absolutely. It was heralded as this huge revolution.
Right. It was the day California theoretically granted thousands of psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners, or PMHNPs, the legal right to open independent solo practices.
Yeah, the headlines were everywhere.
But, because of this really hidden mathematical trap buried deep in the legislation, practically nobody could actually walk through that door on day one.
Which is just wild, right? It is a fascinating disconnect between public policy headlines and the actual operational mechanics of healthcare.
Welcome to our latest deep dive. Today we are focusing directly on you, the mental health professional, or just anyone fascinated by how healthcare actually functions behind the scenes.
Yeah, we're getting into the real nuts and bolts today.
We have this hefty stack of research, specifically drawn from a super comprehensive 2026 practice guide developed by the Psych NP Fellowship.
It is a phenomenal resource, honestly.
It really is. And our mission today is to unpack this seismic shift in California's mental health care landscape. We are talking about the brand new California 104 NP license.
Right, the 104, it's monumental.
Okay, let's unpack this. For the very first time ever, nurse practitioners in California can practice fully independently, like completely outside of a group setting.
Exactly. And we really need to contextualize the sheer scale of this transition. For decades, the psychiatric nursing credential in California legally required a formal tether.
Like a collaborating physician, right?
Yes, exactly. The practitioner needed a physician's signature just to operate legally.
Yeah.
And what this new 104 license does is, it completely cuts that tether.
Which is a huge deal.
It is the most consequential change to California psychiatric practice in maybe 2 decades. It effectively turns a clinical credential into a standalone business asset.
I mean, that fundamentally rewrites the hierarchy of psychiatric care in the state, doesn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. It shifts power, liability, and, of course, revenue streams entirely.
But going back to that headline reading, independent practice starting Jan 1, 2026, it kind of creates a false sense of immediate revolution,
Yeah, the January 1st mirage is what people are calling it.
Right, because the state essentially said, hey, we are officially accepting applications for independent practice. And you'd naturally assume there'd be a flood of practitioners getting that credential in week 1.
But the eligibility math here is just incredibly unforgiving. It really hinges on some very specific prerequisite requirements.
Yeah, let's talk about that math. It's like being handed the keys to a Ferrari, right? But then you realize you literally still have to build the engine from scratch.
That is a perfect analogy. The state demands 3 years of experience, specifically 4,600 hours of California-based direct patient care experience.
And it cannot be just any experience, right?
No, not at all. It has to be accrued in good standing while operating under the specific 103 NP designation.
So, wait. If an experienced NP moves from out of state, say they have like 10,000 hours under their belt, can they just skip the line?
Nope. Out-of-state hours absolutely do not count. The rules are unbelievably strict on this.
Wow, really? So none of it transfers?
Not a single hour. To qualify for the 104, a PMHNP needs an active California license, national certification, and the full 4,600 hours logged exclusively in California as a 103 NP.
So here's the structural trap for you if you were mapping out your timeline right now. That prerequisite 103 MP status, that classification only became legally available to apply for in 2023.
Exactly. The math literally prevents anyone from having it on day one.
So almost no one actually qualified for the 104 license in January. The absolute earliest cohort will not hit their 3-year mark until late 2026 at best.
Right. The timeline is locked behind a strict chronological gate.
There's this brilliant direct quote from the practice guide by Lindsay Hill. She's a doctor of nursing practice and PMHNP. Let me read this.
Oh, yeah, I know the quote you're talking about. It's a good one.
She says, what's underestimated is the time horizon. PMHNPs who think 2026 is too far out to plan for are the same ones who will spend 3 more years waiting on a collaborator's signature.
That framing is just so critical. It shifts the mindset from passive waiting to active strategic preparation.
Because 2026 isn't the finish line, it's the starting gun.
Exactly. For the vast majority of California PMHNPs, the next 18 to 36 months represent a highly strategic eligibility building window.
So since the 103 NP license is essentially the mandatory stepping stone, it begs the question of what exactly the 104 unlocks that the 103 didn't.
What's fascinating here is how the legislative evolution maps onto the daily clinical reality.
Right, going back to Assembly Bill 890?
Yes, AB 890 back in 2020, the 103 NP was born from that, and it was monumental because it removed standardized procedures.
The standardized procedures were those giant thick binders, right?
Yeah, literally thick binders of agreed upon protocols with a supervising physician dictating exact clinical moves. The 103 eliminated the binder.
But it still kept them in a box, geographically speaking.
Right. It legally required the NP to work inside a defined group setting where at least one physician also practiced. So they still operated under the umbrella of a broader medical organization.
But now, the 104 completely removes that group setting requirement.
Yes, it means they can open a true, solo, independent psychiatric practice.
And to make that happen, there was this fascinating legislative cleanup that happened recently with Senate Bill 1451 in 2024.
Oh, the ornamental rules cleanup, yes.
Yeah, they stripped away some incredibly clunky, almost absurd rules. Like NPs historically had to verbally recite to patients that they weren't a physician during an intake.
And they were mandated to use the specific phrase enfermera especializada in certain contexts.
Imagine the friction that causes. You have a patient coming in for acute trauma therapy, and you have to open the session with this defensive, legally mandated script about what kind of doctor you aren't.
It was incredibly awkward for providers, but thankfully, SB 1451 stripped those verbal requirements away. Written notice in the clinic's paperwork is sufficient now.
Which finally treats the practitioner like a modern professional. No more bizarre administrative monologues before you can actually help the patient.
Exactly, but I do want to emphasize that this is not an absence of regulation. This is autonomy with documented guardrails.
Right, it isn't the Wild West.
Far from it. A 104 NP must still strictly stay within their population focus. So for PMHNPs, that is strictly mental health.
So if a patient presents with a complex cardiac issue, the PMHNP obviously cannot manage that independently.
No. They legally and ethically must consult with or refer out to physicians for emergent or out-of-scope conditions. The guardrails rely on the practitioner's rigorous training.
So the discussion naturally moves from the legal definitions to the practical daily realities. Because the shift is actually way more about business than clinical medicine.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the clinical interactions with a psychiatric patient might look identical whether the provider is a 103 or a 104.
But the business side is totally flipped.
Completely transformed. A 104 designation allows a PMHNP to form a wholly owned professional limited liability company or a professional corporation.
It's like the difference between being a highly paid freelance contractor and owning the entire agency yourself.
That is exactly it. You can sign a commercial lease in your own name. And crucially, you can negotiate and hold payer contracts directly.
So wait, does this change how they prescribe controlled substances? Like the DEA rules?
No, that is an important clarification. It does not change federal DEA controlled substance prescribing.
Because federal law trumps state law.
Right. A 104 NP still uses their personal DEA registration and follows all federal rules. The 104 merely removes the state supervision requirements, not federal ones.
But one massive financial benefit is that they no longer have to pay a supervisor stipend.
Oh, yeah. That is huge. Under the 103 or older models, NPs often paid thousands of dollars a month out of pocket just to have a physician agree to oversee their chart. The 104 eliminates that completely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you're shifting from clinical challenges into entrepreneurial ones. And the practice guide points out a very expensive trap.
The finish line misconception, yes.
Exactly. It's treating the license itself as the finish line.
If you clear 104 status without the right setup, you end up with a credential, but literally no practice. You have zero infrastructure.
So what are the actionable steps PMHNPs must take during this 18 to 36-month window? Because they can't just sit around.
No, they have to hustle. First, they need to secure commercial malpractice tail coverage.
For those who don't know, why do they need tail coverage specifically?
Well, leaving a group practice to go solo means you leave their insurance policy. Tail coverage protects you from claims that might surface years later regarding past patients you saw under that old group.
Ah, that makes total sense. And then they need to establish their PLOC or professional corporation, right?
Yes, and start building a patient acquisition plan well in advance.
Now, I want to point out a major limitation here. This is the interstate trap. The 104 does not stack with the APRN compact.
Right, the multi-state licensing agreement. California has historically held out of that compact.
So this is strictly a California-only credential. If you cross state lines into a state without independent practice laws, you lose that autonomy immediately.
It vanishes the second you cross the border. You revert to whatever the scope of practice is in that new state.
So if you are investing 4,600 hours into this credential, you are heavily incentivized to plant permanent roots in California.
Absolutely. Now for the actionable timeline. If you are a practitioner in the field right now, you need to reconcile your hours quarterly.
Like, sit down and compare your personal log against your employer's official count.
Yes, do not rely on informal agreements. Discrepancies need to be resolved immediately.
Because if that clinic goes under, getting those hours verified 3 years later is a nightmare.
It's nearly impossible. You also need to open an administrative prep file right now.
What goes in that file?
National certification verification, your current California RN license, official transcripts, and current live scan fingerprint results.
Oh, the live scan, yeah. Having those biometric results ready prevents massive bureaucratic delays.
And what about payer credentialing? That is the biggest bottleneck. You have to start payer credentialing 6 to 9 months before your projected certification date.
Just to get into the insurance networks.
Yes. Credentialing alone takes 90 to 120 days. If you wait until you get your license to apply, you will have an empty office and zero insurance revenue for months.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah.
It means the California 104 is a destination license, not a starter license.
Exactly. It's a long road.
For PMHNPs in California, the next 18 to 36 months shouldn't be treated as a waiting game. It's an active launch pad to build your business infrastructure.
It is a monumental structural payoff for mental health providers willing to bank the hours and navigate the paperwork.
But it does leave us with a final lingering thought for you to ponder. We know that states with full practice authority, like Arizona and Oregon, grant independent practice on day one.
Right. Day one of licensure. Zero transition to practice hourly requirement.
Meanwhile, California's 104 path requires roughly 6 years of post-certification clinical experience, factoring in the 103 wait times and the punishing 4,600-hour requirement.
It is the absolute longest runway in the country.
So the question is, will this new 104 license successfully build a robust network of independent psychiatric practices in California?
Or will that incredibly long runway ultimately push the next generation of ambitious mental health talent to simply move one state over?
It's a huge question for the future of California healthcare. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep building that infrastructure, and we will catch you on the next one.